Well, good evening. It's so good to have you join us tonight. We're stoked that you're able to join us through the live stream as we get into our first series of this first seminar of our seminar series called You Can't Ask That. So we're going to be looking at topics which Christians often struggle to talk about, or topics which we often don't bring up. And if I haven't met you before, I'm Viv, and I look forward to hearing how you find this through, whether you text in, which I'll explain later, or through the Facebook event. It's a shame that we can't have you here in person. We would have loved to have you all sitting here, but we are looking forward to being able to engage with you in a few ways, and I'll explain them in a bit. But tonight we're looking at a very personal topic, a topic which hits home for many of us, a topic of mental health and a journey many of us are on, or wanting to support those around us with. So we're going to be speaking about some pretty heavy things tonight and hearing some personal stories. So if at any point tonight you feel like you need to step out, please do. Please get in touch with someone you trust. Maybe it's a friend or family member. We'd love for you to do that if you are feeling that way. And there's a phone number to call if you are feeling those things. But before we get into it tonight, I want to introduce who is going to be speaking, who we're going to be hearing from tonight. So on my left we have Nath and Ivette.
Yo.
Nath, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Full name.
Cool.
What do you like to do through the week?
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I can do that. My name is Nathan Joel Green. What do I do during the week? I have just started a placement, so I study social work and criminology at UNSW. In my final year, final placement, and so I'm at Blacktown Hospital. So that's what I've been doing this week. I don't know, trying not to get sick so I can go in is what I've been trying to do. And been watching a lot of the Olympics as well. So I suppose that's what I've been filling my time up with recently, yeah.
Has there been a favourite event?
The Matildas comeback was pretty good. I know they lost last night, that's sad, but Sam Kerr scoring a goal was pretty good, yeah.
Yeah.
The highlight.
Good moment.
Yeah, it was good.
And Ivette, how about yourself? Do you want to introduce yourself and what you do through the week?
Yeah, hi. I'm Ivette Matsouris. I work at the Resilience Centre and at Bridges Counselling, and I'm a psychologist and a mum, a wife, and a Christian. And throughout the week, I've been working from home, doing a lot of online counselling, and doing the house chores and hanging out with the family and watching a bit of TV, crocheting a bit. Just doing some stuff to pass the time and going on walks as well, which is really nice.
Oh, good. Well, it's going to be great to hear from you guys throughout this next few hours. You both have agreed to be here tonight. You're sitting here in person. What's your hope for this seminar? What are you hoping the people who are joining us tonight will get out of this time that we have together?
I think for me, part of the reason why I said yes to being here tonight was I want All Saints to be a place and to be a community where we are talking about mental health. And I suppose something even more specific than that is that I want people to know that they're not alone. And so hopefully by talking about it tonight, by starting the conversation, we can all know that we are not alone if we're going through a mental illness at the moment.
Yeah, I guess for me, my hope is exactly what Nathan said, and also hopefully to share some knowledge and some understanding of some of the things that we can do if we are struggling, hopefully how we can support each other as a Christian community, and also as Viv said as well, just to create some awareness so that we can talk about it more and we can be more mindful that this is an issue and it's a topic that we need to be talking about and supporting each other in. So that would be my hope.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I guess one thing to add on top of what they have said is Tonight isn't going to be the perfect seminar for you if you are wrestling and on a journey with your mental health. We're not going to be able to cover everything or all the questions that you have, but hopefully we'll get a conversation going in this All Saints community and whatever church you might be from, or even if you're not part of a church and you don't know who Jesus is, it's great to have you here. But just know that this won't be the perfect seminar for each of you. I'd love if we could answer everything, but we don't have the time. But we'd love to keep the conversation rolling after this, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. But I mentioned earlier that it's a shame to not have you guys here, but there's ways to check in. Hopefully, on the bottom end of, somewhere down there, there'll be a few numbers. One number is a question number, and you can send in any questions that you might have into us. So we'd love to know that you're there. We'd love to know any questions you might have, and you might have a follow-up question. So if Nath or Ivette or myself say something and you're like, oh, I'm not sure about that, please send it in. We'll try and answer it. I can't guarantee we will, because I might miss it, but bear with us, and we'll also have times for live Q&A sprinkled throughout. That's it pretty much. I'm keen to dive into it. To kick off, we're going to be looking at a personal and a professional view of mental health. So to start off, Nath is going to be sharing with us his own personal story or journey that he's been on with mental health. I'm thankful for how open he's been, how vulnerable he's been, and the voice he's brought for mental health in the church. And I'm keen to hear what he's got. So over to you, Nath.
Great. Maybe just to begin with, I'm just going to pray for us as I share my story. So if you want to pray with me. Dear Lord, we pray that you would help us now as we talk about things that are super, vulnerable and pretty. It can be pretty tough and pretty painful for many of us. It sucks that we're doing this through like a screen, that we can't be face to face, that we can't have that human contact. But we pray that you would be at work, Lord. I pray that through my story and through Ivette and Viv tonight, that this would be really helpful for all of us, and that it would start a conversation about mental illness. Amen. So what Viv said before, if you have any questions or anything I say that doesn't make sense or you want more clarity over, please don't hesitate to send through any questions or anything if you want any clarification over what I say throughout my story. So I guess tonight there's only so much time, and like all of us, our journey with mental illness, I'm sure, is complex, and it's hard to kind of summarize. And so if what I say tonight is, you find it interesting and you want to know more, I have actually written up like my whole story into like 4 blog posts. So if you want, check that out. I'm sure there's a link somewhere on Facebook, or you can go on my page. And that's kind of like the full story, I guess. Where tonight I'm just going to look at a few different bits and pieces. And what I've done is that I've broken up into a few questions just to help to kind of structure it, and hopefully it's easier for you to follow along. So to begin with, what was my experience of mental illness growing up? I suppose it was pretty limited. I wasn't exposed to too much mental illness stuff growing up. None of my friends, to my knowledge, were going through stuff. My family, it wasn't like a main thing. It didn't consume kind of my thoughts much at all. And so I suppose thankfully, that was the case, and that was really cool. I even kind of, I don't know, I was like a chill kid, and I just didn't want to be like a stressy kid, and I kind of found a lot of kind of pride in that. I didn't want to be kind of needy. I liked going with the flow and just being chill. The flip side of that is that when I was 19, so I got through like high school without much mental illness stuff, but it meant that when mental illness did come and was something, it just kind of hit me without without any sort of warning. And so I suppose like a bit of a metaphor is that instead of seeing the water rise slowly and gently, it just felt like there was nothing, and then there was like a tsunami of mental illness which hit me. And it was really difficult to not have a framework or any experience or prior experience. And so, yeah, I don't know, that was kind of my exposure to mental illness growing up. What did the anxiety and depression feel like for me? Well, once again, it's complex and it's hard to summarize, but I suppose it began when I was 19. So I'd finished school, I was at uni, and it seemed to be quite, it was weird. I noticed that I was changing, but once again, I didn't have a framework to know what was changing. And so I would find myself at places such as like about to have a shower. I would lock the bathroom door, and I think it was by locking the door, I gave like a kind of, I couldn't be interrupted. It was just me and my thoughts. And it was bizarre. It was like my feelings kind of had outrun my thought process. And so I felt really sad. I felt really down. I felt stressed. I felt heavy and burdened. And I didn't know why. I remember like thinking, I'm just sad. I'm just really sad. And so I would kind of form like fists and scrunch my face. And I remember just like tears coming out, just being like, why am I so sad? And I found that really difficult, and that kind of increased over time. And so I suppose from there, it kind of like started to infect the rest of my life. And so I began to become really anxious about things that I didn't used to feel anxious about. So social gatherings, parties, even like family lunches became a stress and a bit of a trigger, which was awful because I used to love family lunches. Football became like something that I loved so much, became a stress. I hated going to training. I felt like I was just going to let the team down, that I was going to disappoint my coach, that I wasn't good enough, that it just became miserable. And so I hated going to football training and to football matches. And even like work, I found super stressful, which is funny because, and no offense if you work at Big W, but I was working at Big W and like you can't stuff it up. Like I was putting chocolates on like the shelves. I was unpacking boxes. I was folding boxes up, like pretty basic stuff. And yet the day before, the week before, I just couldn't get out of my mind of how I'm going to fail. I'm just going to fail this job. I'm going to, once again, let down my boss. I'm going to be a disappointment. And so it was really anxiety provoking. And so the next kind of question I guess I've got is, did I ever get to the point where I attempted to take my life or commit self-harm? And in short, no, I didn't. But I definitely flirted with the idea. It was definitely something which consumed me and I found really hard to put to the side. The idea of that this world is fleeting, and it felt like I was just living like a demo, like, you know, like there's demo games which you can only reach like a certain level. It felt like I was at that level. My life was good and I had so much to be grateful for, and yet I was so aware of still just like it's good, but it's not amazing, and heaven will be so much more amazing. And so I definitely flirted with the idea of like going to heaven and making that come to the present. And so I started doing things like holding my breath and doing other things like that, which I suppose at the time I just kind of was like, oh, Nathan, you're just being attention seeking, you're just carrying on. But I suppose in hindsight, I guess I was kind of showing and proving to myself that heaven is really close, and it kind of, empowered me to know that I could actually act on these feelings. And it just kind of made it feel so real. And so I guess it began to kind of snowball from there. And I think the worst it got was driving in my car, and I remember over time there began to be a voice which was super clear, super distinct voice. And it's kind of weird, but it felt like it was coming from this particular tree. And unfortunately, this tree is on the same street as my house. So I drove past it a fair bit. And it felt like this tree was just talking to me. It knew what I wanted. It knew that I wanted heaven. And so it was just saying, Nath, I can give you heaven. Like, it's just minutes away, seconds away. And it knew that I wanted, that I was sick of this world. I was tired of feeling like a failure. I was tired of feeling like a bad Christian, feeling guilty for having these thoughts. I was just, so looking forward to being in heaven, and becoming, like, being the person that I was made to be. I really looked forward to kind of the warm embrace of Jesus, and for him to actually be able to love me because I'll be perfected. I would be the person that I was supposed to be, rather than this lousy failure of a Christian, this broken person, this person who's ungrateful for the good things in their life. And so that's kind of what the tree was tapping into. And as I would drive, there was just that real kind of tug of war, that real the tree just really wanting, like, I don't know, it was just like tempting me, I guess, time and time again. And I don't know, I just knew that I would have to drive past this tree going home. And so I hated coming home from soccer training. I hated coming home from work because I knew that I would have to go past this tree, and I'd have to go into that debate with myself. And it was exhausting. It was really, really hard time to get through. And so there were times when I had to pull the car over, and at this point I had told my parents, or once I did tell my parents, and my girlfriend, I was able to call them, and it was still hard, but I was able to pull over to the side of the road. And there were times when I was home alone, I was left to my thoughts, and I was, like, really terrified that I would enact on these thoughts and desires. And so I'd ring up Hannah and ask if she wanted to hang, which was good. It was good having someone there and not being by myself. And then just quickly, with that question of self-harm, I only thought about this morning, but I would have always said that I didn't commit self-harm, that I never physically harmed myself. But I think maybe it's a bit of a narrow concept of self-harm, because if you think of like mentally, I was harming myself a lot. Like, the negative thoughts I was going through, the self-criticism, I was so unforgiving towards myself. I was so unloving towards myself. And so mentally, I was pretty abusive to myself. And so I guess with self-harm, physically I didn't, but mentally I definitely did. I don't know, there's probably more to say on that, but I was just thinking about that this morning. Okay, so how did I start recovering? This was definitely one of the hardest things that I did. I don't know, there's no good way of telling your parents that you have thought about committing suicide, and that's like a desire that you have. I think I kind of hoped that it would come up in conversation, but it didn't. And so I remember sitting on the couch, probably rambling on about my day, thinking of how can I bring this up with my parents. And I remember saying something like, "Oh, Mum, I think I'm feeling like particularly low." Like, they knew I was anxious, they knew that I was going through stuff, but they didn't know the full extent. And once I said that, it was incredible. I remember Mum, she was ironing or something, and then she came and she sat down, and she brought into the conversation the idea of self-harm. And she said, "Nath, have you ever considered hurting yourself?" And she didn't need to wait for a response. I just like burst into tears. It was like the floodgates had opened. It was weird. It felt like, I suppose the only way to kind of describe it is some sort of reflex, or like shame reflex, where as a 19-year-old, like, dude, it was probably a weird kind of picture to imagine. But I just like went head first into the couch. I remember just like shoving my head under the pillows, trying to cover myself with cushions, because I just felt so humiliated, so exposed, so vulnerable. This secret that I've been holding on to for such a long time. When I say long time, it was probably a few months, but that was long enough. Exposed, and it was out there for my parents to hear. That was really, really difficult. Thankfully, they were amazing. They were present to the moment. They didn't minimize it. They didn't just tell me to, toughen up. And yeah, so they were great. And one of the things they did was they recommended that I saw a psychologist, which was great. It worked out really, really well. And I was really thankful for that. So just to kind of finish, there's a lot more about recovery, but I think we'll talk about that later on in the night. So I won't go into more detail now, but there were a lot of things that helped in my recovery. And as a community at All Saints, I think some bits were helpful, some bits were unhelpful. And so I think it's important that we address the good and the bad that a church community can bring, and just like church kind of culture and thoughts as well. So we'll talk about that later. But I suppose just to finish, one thing that that I have grown from that experience, and something that I want to hold on to as I'm sure there'll be more kind of mental illness stuff for me ahead of me, is this one kind of truth, which is that I'm not alone. I found this really helpful, and that's why I want this to be an encouragement for you to know that you are not alone if you're going through this. Because during that period, I felt super isolated. I felt like I was particularly messed up, and that I was letting God down. But to read and to find out that there's people all throughout the Bible who have gone through mental health issues, that have cried out to God for God to take their life. And that was actually really, really reassuring for me. And to even know that Jesus, this person that I love, to know that he had psychological anguish, and that in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's going through a lot of psychological pain there. And then, ultimately physical pain as well. But there was a lot of mental pain. And so that the fact that he could empathize with me, that he draws near to me, that he knows what I'm going through, I found a huge comfort. And yeah, to finish, Psalm 13 is a psalm which King David wrote years ago. I've got no idea how long ago, but a long time ago. And I take great comfort knowing that his experience is similar to my experience. And so one of the things I did in my recovery was rewrite Psalms and to kind of make them a bit more personal. And so I rewrote the beginning of Psalm 13. And so this was one of my prayers when I was recovering. It's, "How long, Lord? How long will you continue to forget me? How long will you hide your face from me? Do I disgust you? Because how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my anxiety and depression triumph over me? Look on me and answer me, God. Give me some hope, give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death." And so to know that there was King David, one of God's people, went through something similar, what felt like what I was going through, brought me a lot of comfort. And so I suppose if you take away anything, please know that you're not alone. You have Christian brothers and sisters who have gone before you and who are here now at All Saints, going through mental illness, who have gone through suicidal ideation. And so it's my prayer that we can take a bit of comfort and a bit of peace, knowing that we're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nath. That idea that we're not alone, that even when it feels like it, we can be reminded both in the Bible, but also through the experiences of our family, and especially yours. I'm thankful for your being so open and sharing about it, so people know that they're not alone. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Ivette, you're a medical professional, you're a psychologist, you've spent time studying mental health and you've got experience in it. Do you want to lead us through, what mental health is, what it looks like, the different types and the stats, just that info to help us gain a better grounding in what mental health sort of is?
Sure. I've got a really basic definition, which I thought was very clear and gets to the point. So a person's mental health is a person's condition in regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. So when we're talking about someone who's got poor mental health, what we're usually talking about is someone who's experiencing cognitive, emotional, physical and behavioural problems or distress. And usually a combination of this actually affects the way that they function in their everyday life. The two main big mental health issues, I guess, in Australia are anxiety and depression. There are other ones which I'm not really going to touch on because we just don't have the time, but there's personality disorders, there's eating disorders, and there's bipolar, which is a mood disorder, and there's a few others. But anxiety and depression are the two ones that I want to focus on. So when we talk about anxiety, I mean, everybody feels anxious or sad sometimes. So you're talking about anxiety and depression. But anxiety is when, let's say, a situation like a stressful event that has caused anxiety is no longer present, but then the person continues to feel anxious and continues to think in an anxious way. So basically, it's when somebody continues to feel anxious in many situations, and usually in situations that don't warrant that type of reaction. So it's usually excessive, and it involves a lot of distorted thinking. So an anxious person might catastrophize a lot. So in a typical situation, somebody who's experiencing anxiety will think about the worst case scenario. There's a tendency for people who are anxious to ruminate. So a lot of obsessive thinking or going over something that they're worried about again and again and again is quite common. There's a focus inwards. So somebody who's got social anxiety, for example, will be overly concerned with how people perceive them, what they say. They are also hyper aware of what's going on internally. So there's a real internal focus. In terms of feelings with someone who's anxious, usually fear. Fear is the main thing, but there's also dread. So these are kind of variations: terror, apprehension, and worry. In terms of the physical symptoms, when somebody's feeling anxious, there's a whole range of physical symptoms that somebody will experience, and usually very, very quickly. So the typical things that happen is increased heart rate, muscle tension. Some people might break out in a sweat. People get shaky, lightheaded. Some people break out in a rash. Some people, go really red, trembling. These are some common symptoms. And usually what happens is because somebody feels so bad, they tend to avoid situations where they experience these symptoms. So it's really common for somebody who has an anxiety disorder to actually avoid situations that usually bring out some of those physical feelings and some of those ways of thinking. And there's a book that psychiatrists use to diagnose different mental health disorders. It's called the DSM, so it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And there's a whole list of different anxiety subtypes. So I'll mention a few of those, and I'm actually going to read to you a little bit about two people's experience of their type of anxiety. So there's generalised anxiety disorder, and basically that's somebody who experiences anxiety about lots of different things, so lots of different situations. There's panic disorder, and that's somebody who experiences anxiety, but the main, manifestation is extreme physical symptoms of distress. So to the point where they actually feel as if they're either going mad or they feel that they're going to die. So they might have chest pains, and it's not uncommon to go to the doctor or to the hospital to actually find out if something physical is actually going on. Obsessive compulsive disorder, which is somebody who's got a lot of intrusive thoughts, a lot of obsessive intrusive thoughts. Usually those thoughts are not rational, and sometimes, but not always, somebody who suffers from OCD will have a set of rituals that they perform again and again that usually alleviate some of the anxiety symptoms. And there's not necessarily a connection between the two. So you can actually do something that helps you to feel better that's completely unrelated to the anxious thoughts. There's also PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is when somebody experiences something quite traumatic. So it could be they're involved in an accident, or they've witnessed something that's horrific, and then they will experience flashbacks, nightmares, panic attacks, just extreme stress, and a lot of things will trigger the anxiety. Social anxiety, which is very, very common, basically self-explanatory. When somebody experiences social anxiety, they feel quite frightened and have a lot of anxious thoughts in social situations. And then there's agoraphobia, where somebody usually has panic attacks, and so they fear going outside because they're afraid that they're going to experience a lot of anxiety. So they basically avoid, leaving their homes. I thought it would be helpful to, because Nathan shared his story, I thought it would be helpful to just read to you very quickly 2 different people's examples of their experience of anxiety. So the first one, and both of these are from a book that I've got called the Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook for Anxiety. The first one is Ruth's story, and she experiences panic disorder. So I'll just read this to you. She writes, "I have problems just going outside of my house. I get in such a state of panic that I make sure that I have an escape option in all situations. I always drive separately to function so that I can leave if the panic gets bad. I even drove 6 hours alone for a weekend getaway at a lake house with some people I work with because I thought that if I had a panic attack, I could just drive away from there. I always have to make up excuses why I have to drive separately. I have major stomach problems and panic when I even think that I have no control of a situation, like being in a boat and there's no bathroom on the boat. In fact, I've decided to avoid these situations in the future just to be on the safe side. I often feel like I must be crazy, which makes me panic too. I can't handle these attacks anymore and hate feeling like I have no control all the time." So just from reading that, you can hear that this person, because of the extreme physical symptoms, she starts to plan out her life differently. So she avoids situations, she makes sure that there are exit points so that if she feels overwhelmed with a panic, she can quickly escape, and it basically affects her whole life. The other example that I've got is, it's Mike's story, and it's about somebody who experiences social anxiety. "I've been suffering from social anxiety for as long as I can remember. I was a loner as a child and never had any friends. Even when I'm not with people, I believe that they're thinking about me. I think that every time I say something or do something or don't do something, they could suddenly not like me anymore. I feel very uncomfortable around people and fear that they can see my discomfort. Talking is an effort. I fear that people are judging me constantly. I feel like anything out of my mouth will make others think badly of me, that I'm stupid or selfish or lazy. I'm extremely negative and critical of myself. It's so frustrating. I work so hard to get through the day. I start student teaching in a little over a week. I'm terrified about that, but I'm trying not to be, trying to tell myself that I'll be fine. Last semester, when I did my clinical practice, was the worst time of my life. I cried and had a panic attack every day. I completely avoided my housemates. It was just so horrible. I couldn't eat much and lost 15 pounds. I can't go through that again. It's really hard and I'm really scared. I don't know what to do to make it better." So pretty full on, and that's just 2 examples, but that gives you, I guess, a bit of a snapshot of what somebody who maybe experiences anxiety, what their life internally and externally is like. In terms of depression, like I said before, feeling sad is a normal human emotion. But for somebody who experiences depression, those sad feelings are quite intense and they usually last for a long time and they affect lots of different parts of their lives, like Nathan said. So there's a negative bias in the way that somebody who's depressed thinks. There's a tendency to disengage from activities that usually they, used to enjoy or used to be involved in. And there's more suicidal thoughts and thoughts about dying or self-harm, which Nathan mentioned. So, and look, with depression, it can range from either mild or severe, and you can have one bout of depression in your whole lifetime, or you can have, different times in your life where you experience depression at different times, or you can struggle with depression quite a lot. It can last a few weeks, a few months, honestly, a few years for some people. So it's quite debilitating, it can be, and it's really, really important to get help. So some of the characteristics of someone who might be struggling with depression, as I said, include negativity. In psychology, we call that a negative bias, because somebody who's depressed tends to see their world and their situation through a lens of the problem. So instead of seeing the big picture and seeing the good things, there's a tendency to zoom into what's not working, what the problem is, picking on themselves, being very critical about themselves, ruminating about past mistakes, feeling guilty. A lot of those ways of thinking are quite common. Feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, sadness, apathy, guilt, feeling numb, that's pretty common as well. And usually this takes a toll on you physically. It affects your energy levels. So a depressed person won't feel like doing a lot of things that they used to do. They sometimes describe that they feel flat or numb. You can be more emotional, a loss of appetite. We see sleep can change when somebody's depressed. So either they sleep too much or they don't sleep enough. And in terms of behaviour, what we notice and what is important to look for is when you see that somebody is removing themselves from what would be their typical lifestyle. So when they're becoming increasingly withdrawn, they don't want to talk to people, they're more emotional, that's, I think, a bit of an indicator that something's not right. So with depression, sometimes, if you really watch for it, you can pick out some things. With anxiety, it's a little bit more tricky because anxious people sometimes, they either avoid situations, so you wouldn't know half the time that they're feeling anxious, or they can be very good at hiding the fact that they're quite anxious, which is problematic because obviously if we're going to help each other, we need to be more honest about the fact that we're actually struggling internally. So in terms of some stats, I thought it would be helpful to just give you an idea. Now, unfortunately, the stats that I found are a few years old, but, and I'm sure that they've increased since COVID last year. So the stats that I got are from Beyond Blue from 2018. And basically, the stats show that in Australia, about 2 million people will experience anxiety and about 1 million people experience depression. Now, 1 in 5 Australians will experience mental health issues every year, which is heaps. About 45% will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. Again, it's quite a high number. And 65% of people with mental illness do not access treatment. The World Health Organization estimates that depression will be the #1 health concern in both the developed and developing nations by 2030. So the stats are not very good, and we need to be aware that this is a huge issue that we need to not ignore. We need to talk about it, we need to support each other, we need to find out what help there is out there to suggest to someone or to access ourselves if we're experiencing something like this. And we need to just be more informed about what mental health illness is and how it affects someone, so that way we can actually get better. So, yeah, I thought, that would be helpful, just to share some stats and some information.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ivette.
Sure.
It's helpful getting this understanding of what it actually is and the different types. I guess I've just got a quick follow-up question for you there. You've shared with us about anxiety and depression and the different types. For people who are at home and tuning in, if they're resonating with some of these and I guess they haven't thought about it much before, what would you recommend be their next step if they might be worried about what they're feeling or what they've felt recently? What would you recommend to them?
Well, you've got a few options. I mean, obviously you can, if you feel that you've been experiencing some of this and it has started to affect different aspects of your life, so it's trickled into not just feeling it sometimes, but really starting to, cause some changes, some significant changes, then I would recommend that you talk to someone, maybe somebody at church, or go see a GP. You can get what's called a mental health care plan, which allows you to have 20 sessions with a psychologist or a social worker, and each session provides you with a rebate, so it makes it more affordable. A lot of people go and see psychologists and counsellors and social workers. It's not uncommon at all, and there is no shame in getting help, because there's nothing worse than feeling that you're alone and isolated with something that you're struggling with. And what I usually like to tell people that helps them to just, get their head around mental health issues is, think of it like a physical problem. Like if you were sick, like physically sick, you would go and see a doctor. If you needed medication because you had, some infection that was not healing, you would go and get antibiotics. So you would not hesitate to go and get some help if it was a physical problem. And I think that that's the mindset that we need to have in regard to mental health, which is sometimes we cannot get through it on our own, and we do need to get some help. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about not just getting that type of professional help, but some things that you can do naturally that can help you while you're getting the help, and maybe in the lead up to getting, to see someone. So, I think that will be helpful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great to have those next steps, I guess, handy. Thanks for both sharing there. We're going to spend some time now looking at any questions you guys have sent in and questions that you guys have put in the rego form. So hopefully through the night, if we don't answer your question specifically in question time, we would have covered it in our seminar. But if not, we'd love for you to get in touch with us. But we'll do our best to answer these questions. Let's get into it. The first question is, how can men approach and support other men who may be suffering from mental health issues? So I guess, Nath, it's a bit more of a you question, but Ivette, we'd love to hear from you as well.
I think it's a good question to be asking. I think obviously mental illness affects everyone. I think the stats would be clear on that it's not a man's issue or a woman's issue. Like we both cop it. But I do, I suppose from my experience, I did feel particularly alone. I don't know. I didn't know any other males who had gone through a mental illness and they needed to actually go and see a counsellor and a psychologist. Something interesting that my dad said when I asked him, when they told me that I needed to see a counsellor, what I said originally was, but I'm not a teenage girl going through a breakup issue. And I know that sounds like horrible, and I apologise for my 19-year-old self. But that's what I thought counsellors did. I thought they helped girls go through breakups at school. That's what I thought the school counsellor did. Obviously, that's not true, and that's a bad thought to have. But that was my kind of thought. And so what Dad said was, you'd be surprised about how many men at All Saints, he didn't tell me who, obviously, but how many men at All Saints that you would actually look up to as role models and as, like nice people who have struggled quite severely through mental illness and who have seen psychologists and counsellors. So I think hearing that and knowing that it is common among men was really helpful. And so I think we need to be talking about it. I think men need to be talking about it. I think everyone needs to start talking about mental illness and to treat it seriously, and to know that, I don't know, men are like, we're not, I don't know, I feel like there is that kind of thing that we need to be tough, control our emotions, but I think that's a lie, and I think it's unhelpful, and I think we shouldn't be pushing that kind of stereotype of men that we need to be macho men, that we don't show emotions. I think we need to talk about it, and men need to be honest and vulnerable.
Yeah. So I guess we need to ask the questions. We need to, embrace. It's going to be awkward. No matter how we approach it. So I guess we need to embrace that. And I guess it's helpful knowing the statistics of it's nearly 50% of people who struggle with it. There's going to be a man in your life who might be struggling with it now, or will in the future. Thanks for that. Did you have anything to add on top of that, Ivette?
No, I think Nathan covered that really well.
Just the mic.
Yeah. I think that Nathan covered that really well, especially in regard to not feeling ashamed, because, God created us and we all share in common emotions. So the idea that men should only experience, a select few, that they're not allowed to be vulnerable, that they're not allowed to experience emotional pain, that's just so false. And like you said before, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he obviously really struggled with what he was experiencing. He actually said, the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. So, if Jesus experienced emotions, he experienced grief, he experienced stress, then hey, everyone is going to experience that at some point in their life. So we've got to normalise it and understand that it's not for a select few. Mental health does not discriminate. It's not for a select few.
Yeah, thanks for that. Second question that's coming is, how can I best deal with social anxiety at church? Or how can I help others to understand when I can't make it because of anxiety? So I guess there's two questions in there.
I think in regards to anxiety, and I've actually counselled a few people with this situation who are Christians and who really struggle to be sitting in church, and they feel so anxious while they're sitting there that what happens is that they have an internal panic attack. So people around would be completely unaware, and then just having a lot of people around them, and the sound, all of your senses become, highlighted. So sounds become extra loud. Sometimes there's just too much. It's almost like a sensory overload. So when somebody is at the point where they are really struggling to come to church, I would say for the person that's struggling, be honest. Tell somebody that you trust and somebody that you think is caring, and tell them what you think would be helpful for you. So because a lot of times people, Christians and non-Christians, want to help, but they just don't know how because they don't understand. So, and even if they don't understand because they haven't experienced it themselves personally, it's important for the person that is going through it to be able to teach the other people or the other person that, is trying to help them out how to be a good support. And it might mean that if they're really struggling to not come to church, that maybe they, tap in with that person, say, I can't come to church today because I'm just feeling really, really anxious. And that support person can maybe check in on them. So maybe go to visit them, obviously not during COVID times, but, at other times, go visit them or ring them up, follow up and see what's happening. And sometimes what I encourage as well, especially with anxiety, is to come up with a plan. Because with anxiety in particular, people tend to avoid, and that's the worst thing you can do, because you're teaching yourself that the situation is too scary to face, and that you're not in that situation learning how to cope, which is problematic. So if you come up with a plan, if you're the person suffering with social anxiety, if you have a plan of how to come to church, for example, sit at the back, only stay for half an hour, but still come, or stay there for the whole time, but if you feel nervous, you sit in next to your support person. There's lots of different things that you can come up with that can help you so that you don't feel that you're on your own, sitting there going through something internally that is just a really horrible experience. So I would say talk about it. Share the plan that maybe you've come up with, with your psychologist. But definitely, it's important to really be engaged with your community and normal things like going to church. So avoidance is not good. So I would definitely say try not to avoid.
Yep. Anything to add on that, Nath?
I think from my own experience, something recently that I'm trying to kind of implement when I get socially anxious, and this won't help everyone, and people are at different level, like different places on their journey of dealing with social anxiety, but something which I'm trying to do at the moment is before entering a situation or a conversation that I know might be triggering for my anxiety, is to remind myself, just kind of simplifying it down to a simple statement, which is, how can I bless this conversation? And I think it just helps me. Normally I go into a conversation and I'm thinking, how do I have good eye contact? I start overanalyzing and I'm thinking, have good eye contact, stop looking at their left eye, look at their right eye. Like I do weird stuff and I'm like focusing on the wrong thing. I'm not listening to what they're saying and I feel like, oh my goodness, I forgot like their name. I don't even know who I'm talking to. Where if I just kind of relax and I try to remind myself, how can I bless this conversation? It kind of lowers the bar and I can just go into a conversation, and even if I don't say anything, that's okay. My non-verbal nodding might bless someone, or me being there might bless someone, and that's enough. Like, we don't have to go beyond that. I think, I don't know, that's been helpful for me to, how can I bless this conversation?
So something that we can do as a church family to support those people who, I don't know, might have less of an anxious conversation. Yeah, that's helpful. We got time for one more question.
Nathan said, because you touched on something that I think is important. I think with somebody who's anxious, socially anxious, usually there's a preoccupation with what's going on inside. So, all the internal thoughts of, how are people going to, perceive me? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to embarrass myself? Am I going to appear panicky, or whatever it is? So I think what's really helpful for a Christian who's struggling to come to church, which is similar to what you've said, is to actually have a reason to come to church that's got nothing to do with you, because there's already too much of an internal focus. So if you try to think beyond you, so I'm coming to church because I want to learn about God. I'm coming to church because, like you said, I want to maybe provide a blessing for somebody else. So if you can think outside of yourself, sometimes that reason can be enough for you to focus on that and get you in the building and help you to not feel as anxious. So, just picking up from what you said.
Yeah. And final question, how can you help someone who's denying or ignoring their own mental health and help them to seek professional help? So I think, how do you help someone who knows they're struggling with it but struggles to go and get help?
So they know they're struggling with a mental illness of some sort, but how do you, I think it's pretty common. I don't know, I feel like at youth group, as a youth leader, I don't know, I think that's come up a few times, and it's difficult. I think it's not your place to force people. I don't think that is a helpful thing. You can't drag someone kicking and screaming into a psychology room. And so I think meeting them where they're at, and so if they're willing to talk to you, that's a good place to start. Be curious, ask questions, listen intently to what they're saying, And I think just being there is really important, and showing that you're committed to them. I think it gets a bit tricky if you think they're going to physically hurt themselves. That's not something which you should kind of carry by yourself. And so I'm interested to know what Ivette thinks about that. Kind of chuck it over to you, because
Yeah, I like your answer. I really do. I guess I can't not think like a psychologist with this one. And my first thought was, my question that I would ask, I'm curious about, is what's stopping them from actually seeking help if they actually are aware that they've got an issue? Because like I said, like with a physical problem, if you were physically ill, you wouldn't hesitate to go to the doctor if you felt that you needed to. So I'd be curious to find out what is it that's preventing that person from actually seeking help. So that's psychologist hat on. In terms of if somebody is not wanting to seek help, but they are doing something that potentially can be harmful, I would say at that point, even if they've shared something with you and have said to you, this is what I'm thinking, and it could be, some type of suicidal thoughts or self-harm, it is our responsibility and our duty of care to make sure that that person is safe. So you shouldn't keep that as a secret, and it would mean that you would have to maybe tell somebody, higher up in the church, or, if it's a young person and their parent, maybe to inform the parent, because it's dangerous to leave someone with those thoughts for a long time and they're trying to deal with it on their own, but clearly maybe they're not dealing with it properly. So, again, just think of it as a physical issue. You would definitely, report something if somebody you would, get them to get help if they had a physical problem. So, yeah, but I like your answer as well, to actually meet them where they're at. I think that's very important. I agree, 100%.
And I think if you do tell either their parents or take it up, make sure you say it. You tell them, like,
yes,
they might not like it, but I think you should tell them.
Absolutely.
And not go behind their back and they go
Yes.
home and their parents are like, oh, we've heard from your friend that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think make sure you do that. And I think also be creative as well. Maybe, I don't know, it depends on the relationship or friendship but like if you find out what's stopping them from seeking help, it could be the fear of making an appointment, booking an appointment. And so maybe do that with them, offer to help them with that, or even offer to go to that first appointment with them. I'm sure the psychologist won't mind. Like, it's better for both of you to go. You be a support person, or you can wait in the lobby area, or you could pick them up, or go out for, I don't know, froyo afterwards or something. I don't know, just be a good friend and think creatively about how you can encourage them to get help.
And taking a step back and looking bigger picture, I think what might also be helpful is this culture that we have of talking about mental health and sharing our journey. I guess when you're at a point when you're comfortable to do so, that is a huge help, because I feel like a few years ago I wouldn't have known that, like, some of my close friends see psychologists and the benefit that it is for them. So how do we bring it into conversations in the day-to-day and not just every now and then. Final thing, it's not a question, it's an encouragement. This is from Amelia. She just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story, Nathan. She said she related to it so much and so deeply, and it made her feel so seen. So thanks for using your voice to encourage such important conversations. Thanks for all the questions you guys are sending in as well. This is great. We're going to try and work our way through these questions and do our best. But if we don't get to your question, a thing that we can do is if you put in your name and that you'd want someone to talk to you about that question after your initial text that you sent in, we can follow that up if we don't get to it tonight. So just keep that in mind. We're going to spend the next 5 minutes or so taking a break. Give these guys a break from these orange couches so they don't fall asleep. They are very comfortable couches, and hopefully it's a chance for you guys at home to maybe get another cup of tea or stretch, and we'll be back here in 5 minutes or so. You'll hear us making some noise. So we'll see you then. Hopefully you've come back from your break. These guys have been supplied with fresh tea. I've got my cup of water. We're ready for the second half, hopefully. I'm looking at a panicky tech crew, but I reckon they're ready. Yeah. Done. Well, thanks for the questions that have been sent through and for engaging in that way. It's great to know you guys are there and really valuing this discussion. In this second half, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what is helpful and what is unhelpful in around mental health and a mental health journey, because I'm sure we've all experienced unhelpful things, as Nath touched on in his story, and we don't just want to stay in that. We want to know what's helpful for us personally if we're on a mental health journey, and for those we're supporting and sharing our lives with. So, what's unhelpful, guys? What is unhelpful for someone's mental health?
I think there are a few things in particular that I became aware of when I was going through my own experience. I think I thought that the church was, a safe haven, and it should be like a place for people with mental illnesses. That's what we should be on about. But I found myself being a bit frustrated with certain things. So I think the first one, which we've already said, but by not talking about it, it felt like I was the only one. And so I suppose something kind of practical was in prayer points at Bible study. And this is everyone. Like, I've been in heaps of different Bible studies, and it seems to be pretty consistent. And it's something I struggle with too, is being authentic in prayer points. I find when our prayer points are consistently, I pray for like exams, or I pray that I would, read my Bible more, which they can be real like legit things. And so I don't want to minimize genuine prayer points. But I suppose I'm getting at prayer points which we haven't really thought about it, and so we just kind of toss out something. Because that's not only not helpful because people can't pray for what's really going on, but I think it gives the message to other people who are struggling that they are particularly broken. So I know for myself, like I heard people praying for, I only prayed 5 times this week, help me to pray for 10 times. And it's like, oh wow, like that's what you're praying about. Well, I'm praying about like what's on my mind is I don't want to kill myself. Like I don't want to hurt myself. And so then I would kind of panic, and I'd be like, oh yeah, pray for like Bible reading. And so that's everyone's thing. That's on everyone. But I think for people who, I don't know, this is a community. I think we can get better at that, being honest, authentic. And you don't have to share everything with everyone. That's not what I'm saying. But with your Bible study, being authentic in prayer points. Just 2 kind of other things kind of quickly is I think as a culture, we can get better with our testimonies. I think a lot of our testimonies, which is, for those that don't know, testimony is like how you became a Christian, kind of your journey of how you became a Christian. And often what you find is that people will have these big things that happen. It might be mental illness, or it might be something else that they've struggled through, or some other kind of brokenness that they've had to wrestle with. And it's amazing, it's courageous, but it's always from a point of hindsight, and it's always from a point of like I'm fixed now. And so and like I'm guilty of it. It's like this story, you have to be comfortable to share it. And so that might not be right for you in the midst of your depression or mental illness to be sharing that with everyone. However, I think if we can be by creating this culture in our community, it might help us in our testimonies and when we talk to people to not always talk about, 2 years ago I really struggled with this, but now I've conquered that and I'm fine. But having the ability to share from a point of weakness, and I think that needs to come from our leaders. I think it's helpful when our ministers share when they struggle with things and coming from a point of weakness, not a point of strength. And youth group leaders, Bible study leaders, like if you have a position of power, it's really good if you can show some weakness and not just strength. yeah, and we know that God uses weakness. Like he makes that pretty clear throughout the Bible. And I've forgotten the last one, so I'm gonna stop there.
So what's unhelpful? For somebody who's trying to support somebody else, what I have found is it's unhelpful to think that you can't offer any support because you haven't experienced it yourself or because you don't understand. So, so what I mean by that is, I've had situations with my work where, for example, I might see someone, a young adult who's, having panic attacks, and a parent will come with them, for a session and ask me, what can I do to support them? And they seem pretty helpless and they feel as if they can't do anything. But the reality is you can, even if you don't get it, and you don't have to get it. I'm going to give you an example, which is a personal example, and this was a situation that I went through just after Naomi was born. So Naomi's 8, and I was trying to figure out what to do in terms of work. And anyway, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I was pretty emotional for a few months, and teary off and on, which is kind of uncharacteristic for me. So it was definitely a change. And I remember, obviously Paul's trying to support me. Paul's my husband, if you don't already know. And being an engineer, he's into solutions. Let's fix this problem. Let's solve the issue. And, being a good, helpful person, he did the normal thing and suggested solutions. Maybe you can do this, maybe you can do that. And no matter what he said to me, it actually didn't help me feel better. And it was quite frustrating, and I felt like he didn't understand, even though he was trying to be helpful. And then one day, something happened, and Paul said to me the best thing I have ever heard. And it actually helped me so much. It was the most helpful thing he actually said to me. And I'm going to tell you almost word for word because I haven't forgotten it, and it's been 8 years. He said to me, and Paul, if you're listening, I bet you haven't. You don't remember this, but you're gonna remember now. He said to me, "I really don't understand what you're going through." Okay, and that was like, wow. He said, "But whatever you decide to do, I'm going to support you." So for me, that was like just a burden had lifted, because what I realized was I didn't need Paul to be the problem solver for me. I needed somebody to validate that I was actually struggling with something that I needed to sort out. And for him to actually say that to me just made me feel very supported. So did he actually get what I was going through? Probably not. But he could see that I was struggling, and he was going to be available for me with whatever I decided to do. So my point is this. You may not understand what your friend is going through, or what your partner's going through, or what a parent's going through, or what a child's going through, but you can always ask them what they need and how you can best support them. You don't need to understand everything. Even though we all share common emotions and we all suffer, and the Bible talks about that, just like Jesus suffered and was comforted by God, we were also sharing the sufferings and the comfort too. The Bible talks about it, but it doesn't mean that we will experience exactly what somebody else has gone through. So, but we can still be of comfort to each other, and we're supposed to be. So I think it's unhelpful for you to think that you can't help, because you actually can, and you just need to ask, and you just need to be there. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think is unhelpful is to believe that there are no options or that things are never going to change. From an emotional point of view, nobody experiences the same emotion forever. Nobody is in the same experience forever. You can be feeling really bad for a period of time, and then things do get better. And sometimes they get better very, very slowly, and that's really hard. But life is like that. It's full of ups and downs. And so it's important to realise that emotions change, situations change, the way that we see the situation also changes. So don't think that there are no options. There are. Don't think it's always going to be like that. That's not true. It can change. So I think it's helpful to keep our minds focused on things that are truthful and things that are actually going to help us. Because when you're struggling with mental health issues, often there's a distortion in the way that you see the situation, and that's part of the problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. And that, I guess, that attitude that Paul had, I think that's an unhelpful thing that I often can bring in to these situations with mental health, but also like a lot of other things. If there's an issue, I think we all can have this Bob the Builder attitude of like, let's fix it. But the Bible actually says in Romans 12 to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. It doesn't say to fix those who mourn or to fix those who rejoice. So I guess acknowledging that we can, rather than need to have the answer, but just to walk alongside to share our lives and our thoughts and our feelings with them as well. And another thing that can also be unhelpful is I think people are scared to make mistakes, especially with mental health. There's this, they get paralyzed and like, what if I say the wrong thing? It's going to tip them over the edge. And it just means we don't say anything. It means we don't ask the questions. The truth is we're all going to make mistakes, especially with mental health. We're going to ask the wrong things. We're going to say the wrong things. But I think if you can embrace that and learn, I guess, from those mistakes, that's helpful rather than going, oh, I don't know about that. We've looked at unhelpful. It'd be a shame to leave it at that. Let's spend some time diving into the helpful things. I guess one aspect which of mental health and a helpful response to mental health, which often isn't talked about, can often be the Bible. How is the Bible helpful for us in responding to mental health?
I realised I've got some notes here from the questions that you sent in, and I realised that I don't have my notes for this. But I think the Bible is clear that that a part of the broken world that we live in is that we will have shame. And I think shame is similar to guilt, but it's different. And I think we see that God cares about our shame. So I would say that shame is less about I've done the wrong thing. Shame is I am a bad person. I am wrong. I'm messed up. And it's kind of the feeling of, instead of a judge, this is kind of from Ed Welch, if he's written some stuff on this. It's less about a judge condemning us in a court, and it's about the social kind of viewpoint of kind of being exposed and made to feel vulnerable and humiliated because of something we've done or something that's happened to us as well. And so I think with mental illness, we carry a lot of shame, this kind of secret, this distortion of who we are. And we see the Bible, it names it. Like, the Bible isn't this kind of, it doesn't make shame vague. It's not vague with mental illness. It's, if you look out for it, if you have a lens on, you can see it come up over and over again. And I think that it shows us that God cares a lot about our shame, and he cares a lot about our mental illness. And I suppose there's a lot that can be said on it, but something that I've taken, something I'm wrestling with, and something that I'm trying to, I'm thankful for, is I think the answer to shame with our mental health is to isolate, it's to be made alone, it's to hide from others. And there was a quote that kind of talks about how suicide isn't so much, and this is a stereotype, but potentially suicide isn't the desire to die, but it's the desire to hide from people and to hide from this world. And I'm not sure if that's true for everyone, I'm not sure, but I think I resonated with that quote because I think it was shame that was wanting me to hide, and it was suicide was that final thing. It was like hiding, and therefore the answer to that hiding was ultimately hiding in death. And I think the Bible and the gospel has this beautiful answer where instead of us needing to hide in death, in our own death, in suicide, we can actually hide in Christ who died. And he did die. And I think something that we get right, people with suicidal ideation, with depression get right, is that shame matters and it's big and it feels like death is the answer. And in a way, death is the answer, but the beautiful gospel truth is that it doesn't have to be your death. It doesn't have to be you hiding. And so I think, I don't know, I take a lot of comfort knowing that I can hide in the fact that I have a king and a father who sent his son to die that death for me, so I can hide in him and take great delight. And yeah, as Ivette said before, it doesn't mean Christians, our life will be easy, not at all. But it does mean we have an anchor. It means we have a refuge that we can turn to. And ultimately, we don't have to hide in our death, but we can hide in the embrace of Jesus. Yeah.
To add on that event.
Okay, so it's from the Bible.
The Bible.
That's okay. Well, my thoughts straight away go to, and I guess I'm trying to see the Bible, use the Bible as the authority in terms of mental health, not the other way around. So, and the Bible does talk about stuff, which is great. I mean, the Bible is the ultimate, I guess, a self-help book, except it's God that's written out the instructions, which is fantastic. And he's the one that has initiated, I guess the movement in our lives. So, but the Bible talks a lot about about the way that you think. And when it comes to mental health, what I want to make clear is that you're feeling bad and your life has changed, but a lot of it's got to do with the way that you're seeing your situation a lot of the time. Not always, though. And so the Bible talks about that. I mean, in Romans 12:2, I think it says to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then there's a really popular verse on anxiety in Thessalonians. And the first half is the bit that everybody, quotes, which is not be anxious for anything, but through prayer and petition, and it goes on. But the second half is important because it says what you should be focusing on, which is whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is worthy of praise, to meditate on these things. And then Paul goes on and tells us to actually follow in what he does. So the Bible gives you a way to, help you, a way to see, see a way out of it, which is part of the problem is that sometimes we are over-focused or focusing or seeing something in a way that is actually very unhelpful and sometimes harmful. So it is important to focus our minds on the truth, on God's truth. And even from a psychology point of view, we always encourage people to focus on the facts. Because with anxiety, for example, there's a lot of, catastrophic thinking. There's a lot of irrational thoughts. With depression, there's a lot of negativity. We call it a negative bias. And so the Bible cuts through all of that. The words in the Bible teach us what we should be thinking about and how we should be seeing the situation. And that doesn't mean that it's all happy. I mean, as Nathan said, there are examples of people in the Bible, including Jesus, who clearly suffered. And even last week when we had our Bible study, we were looking at the Psalm. King David was obviously going through some stuff that was pretty challenging, and it sounded like he was quite down. But the last part of the Psalm says, "But and I will trust in you," and it's got all these really good things that he decides to do that he really holds on to. So I think something that can be helpful, and something that was helpful for me a very long time ago when I was struggling with anxiety, was obviously you talk to people, you read up on mental health, and you get all the help that you need. But from a Christian point of view as well, was to actually, what I did was I looked through different verses in the Bible that I thought applied to my situation, and then I wrote it down into a little booklet, and every day I would just read some of those verses back to me. And I just found that it was uplifting, and it helped to override the stuff that was in my head, so that I had a different message, something else to cling on to that wasn't my version of events, it was God's version. And that really, really did help a lot. But obviously it was still a slow process, but it did help a lot. So I think that that's important, from a biblical point of view. Yeah.
Yeah. And going off what you said about feelings, one thing that I've heard which is very helpful is feelings aren't facts. So that's not getting rid of the fact that feelings are real and we feel them and they're important, but often we forget what the facts are. And it ties into another point on the Bible is we are told in the Bible that there are people who are suffering with depression and anxiety and a whole bunch of things around that. You get people like Elijah, Jeremiah, so these are like big prophets of the day, like faith superstars in a way. People like David, which we've mentioned, and even Jesus. And they felt these ways, they had these feelings. But if you look at all these characters and their stories, what we notice is that God is with them. Like that's the fact. So their feelings, don't get rid of that fact. It might not feel that the way that they want, but we know God is with them, and we have a bigger, I guess we have hindsight over how God was using that time. So I thought that was really helpful of being able to pull that out of the Bible. It acknowledges our feelings, but it also pushes these facts and these truths, which you talked about, Ivette, which are very helpful to reshape our thinking. We don't study the Bible here alone. We're not individuals. We're in a community. How does community help us? Because I guess all these things can be unhelpful, but looking at community, how can community be a major help for people with mental health issues?
I think community is huge. As I said before, mental illness, it isolates, it takes you away from others, and you feel very alone. And so community is, I think, a bit of an answer to that. And I think as Christians, we have something unique. I think in the world, people try to find community all over the place. And that's genuine. They're not. No, you can find community in your football club, in the sporting team you like, in the staff room, in, I don't know, whatever it is, wherever you find community. That's awesome. But I think as Christians, we have some really good kind of practices that we do as a community. And I think one of them is like Bible study. It's funny, like in social work, we get taught how good it would be for groups of like young adults or groups of people from different ages, for them to meet and for them to share, for them to listen to each other. And it's just like in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's what we do in Bible study, and we go deep. Like we don't need an Are You OK day, or we don't need like a fundraiser week for the rugby league to encourage us to talk to people. We should be, and we are doing this weekly. And I think that is really important. And so I would say community is incredible because it reminds us that we're not alone. It shows us that we're not this really weird or bad or distorted, stuffed up Christian, but that multiple people around us are going through similar things. And I think just the comfort to know that like prayer, when people pray for you and it's a genuine thing, not just, hey, I'll be praying for you, but when it's a genuine, like people walking alongside you, people walking on your journey with you, I think community can bring a lot of comfort and really help and enable recovery from your mental illness. Yeah.
You mentioned a unique community. I guess a Christian community can be a pretty standard community. Like we might not be that different to a rugby club. how do we make that unique? Like you mentioned, prayer is a big thing, and sharing those things and walking alongside. But how else do we go beyond that? How do we be this unique community which stands out, which cares for one another?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's definitely not, we're not unique because we're really good at this. We're not unique because we've nailed like how to be a good support team. Not at all. The church stuffs up all the time, and like our community will stuff up heaps. I think the uniqueness is that we have a desire to be Christ-like, and that is outward focused, and that is, it's not about, like, we come to church, we come to Bible study, to grow, to learn for ourselves, but we come to serve each other. And so I think it's that outward kind of looking out for the person that needs a bit of comfort or those kind words. Like, we come with our eyes looking outwards, not inwards. And I know from my own experience, when I go to play football, I'm just thinking about how good I can score a goal or something. Or when I go to uni, I want to answer the question. Like, I'm not thinking about serving other people. I should be, but I'm not. But I think at church, I don't know, we have like, I don't know, I feel like as Christians, we should be outward focused, which will make us unique.
Yeah. So being that outward focused community is what's going to do it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, done. Anything to add on that, Ivette?
I love what you said. I guess I agree with everything, and just to add on a little bit, what's helpful for me anyway is to remember why we should be a community. And in the Bible, it does talk about God using us. So somebody posted on Facebook the other day a section from 2 Corinthians, and it talks about God being the God of comfort and God of compassion. And then it talks about how we have got a responsibility to also show, compassion to people, just in the same way that we've received, some of that comfort as well, and compassion. And if you read a little bit on in that section, Paul the Apostle actually gives us an example, because he talks about how he was quite distressed in Macedonia, and he says that there were conflicts on the outside, but there was fear on the inside. And then he says, but God comforted him by sending Titus. So God sometimes uses people, and so we need to be available, we need to be aware of it. God uses us to help each other. So sometimes God gives us the comfort directly through, some words that we might read in Scripture, or, somebody praying for us. And sometimes it's just somebody being there, somebody's experience, just knowing, like what Nathan said, that we're not alone. So we have to remember that it's part of our, ministry is to actually be there and to be a community. So being a Christian is not something that you do in isolation. There's a really great book that I would highly recommend, if you like reading. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but the author's name is Trevor Hudson, and he's a South African minister, but he's also a counsellor. And in his book, he's got a section where he talks about how we're meant to be focused on other people, and he says that gospel life is life together. So we're not doing it on our own. We're supposed to support and help each other. So to remember that we have got a really special job to do, I think is really important. It should be at the forefront of our minds. So, I think that's really helpful for me anyway, to remember that.
Yeah, and you started to touch on it, but I guess in a community, it's made up of relationships. And, often, a lot of the time, it'll be one-on-one interactions or smaller groups. I think there's this big fear of, what do I do when it's a one-on-one thing? Like, how do I support someone well relationally? What are some helpful things in that area we have relationships. A church community is full of them, but how do we use them well? What are you guys' thoughts?
I had a really good think about this one, and I actually want to read something out, because the first thing that I think is really important, number one, is to recognise that you've got a very special role to play in other people's lives, which I've mentioned. But the second thing is to listen. And Trevor Hudson, which is the guy that I just mentioned, in his book, he's got a really nice explanation of what it really means to listen. So I just want to read that out. He writes that listening says to the other person, I care about you. I respect your uniqueness. How you feel and what you say matters to me. And in order to make this clear, I'm willing to set aside my own concerns, give you space to share yourself, and offer you my focused attention. I want to try and understand the inexhaustible mystery of your inner world. And I just thought that was beautiful. And there's also this acronym, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, it's WAIT, W-A-I-T. Has anyone heard of that? It stands for Why Am I Talking? So it's something that I think the Mazuruses need to learn a bit more. But it's a good one. And basically it's important because part of helping other people is to actually listen to them. Somebody is not going to share with you what's going on inside if they feel that you're not going to listen. So it's really important to put time aside and really give someone your attention. So, and then when you're listening, to not judge what they say, because it's their experience, not yours. Now, obviously, you can, add some of your own ideas. You can ask them, what they think would be helpful, but not to judge what they're experiencing, because it's real. It's real for them. So definitely ask them. Actually, can I just share something? Because I just remembered something along those lines. I was once counselling a young adult girl who was having panic attacks. And I mentioned before that her mum came into the session because she wanted to ask me, how can I best help my daughter? And so I asked the daughter, can you answer that question instead of me? How can your mum help you? And what she's actually said, her response was, it was really interesting because I didn't expect it and her mum didn't expect it either. So she has panic attacks and she didn't ask, let's practice deep breathing together, don't distract me, don't, talk to me. She didn't ask for any of those things. She said, when I say hug, I just want you to hug me. And that's all she wanted. So she didn't want her mum to make her feel better in any other way except just to comfort her. So, and I think that's biblical. I mean, that's what, we've been talking about, being there, listening, comforting, not always coming up with solutions, but just being there is really, really important. So, yeah.
Yep. Wait, it's good.
Yeah, I like it, don't you? Yeah.
Nath, anything on top of that?
Yeah, I love all of that. I think that's super helpful. I think, I kind of forgot the question, but I'm just going to say this. I think it's important as well to recognize those, like the carers, the supporters, if you are being relational, to look after yourself. And it is really hard to look after someone who's going through mental illness. It's really difficult. I know when I was dating Hannah and I was going through my anxiety and depression, I was self-absorbed. I was an awful boyfriend. I was just thinking about myself. I was just trying to get through the day. And I wasn't really there to... there were times when I just wasn't even thinking about what Hannah was feeling. There was a time when she brought me jelly, and I love jelly, and normal Nathan would have just straight away would have tucked into it. But I just put it in the fridge and just kind of ignored this nice thing that Hannah had done for me. And I think it's just a reminder that it can be really difficult caring for someone with a mental illness. And so I think it's important that you are looking after yourself, and if you need professional help, get professional help. You're not weak if you need professional help. All these things I've been saying for the person with a mental illness, if the people around in that circle around them, it's gonna be hard work, rewarding and record to help, and we should do it, but it's still going to be hard and taxing. And once again, I think we need to not be ashamed of getting professional help when we're supporting. So I think, and then we'll be a better helper and supporter and carer when we are looking after ourselves. So I think that related to your question.
Yeah, the relational bit.
Yeah,
That's
good.
for sure.
Got it.
And going off that, Nath, I think one thing which I'm learning, and I think we all need to learn, is if you're in that caring role, or if you're investing in someone at all, you need to get that serving others also means serving yourself. And that's going to be hard for a lot of people where, I don't know, just thinking about the church community that we have, there are people who look out for others, invest in others so much, but it gets to a point when you're going to have to go, look, I'm going to have to take a step back and actually serve myself a bit here. I need to do the things which are helpful for me. It's going to be hard. Serving isn't easy. That's why I'm talking about serving yourself here. Because, without that, I guess you just have nothing to give, and it gets to a point when you're not going to be able to care at all. So that's a helpful thing which I'm wrestling with, and I think we all need to think about. It's hard balancing that, and it'll be unique to each person.
I just want to say off that, it's not sinful. Self-care is not sinful. I think another maybe unhelpful thing of the church is we sometimes might give we might say outright, or we might kind of give the idea that self-care is a selfish thing, it's a sinful thing. We need to be selfless. So we shouldn't be selfish, we should be selfless and all about the other person. I think there's truth in that, but I think if you go too far that way, we have a lot of people serving everyone, but like falling to bits inside and not really there to actually care and actually support and can't actually become present because they've got their own stuff going on. So I think, something to be mindful of, and I just want to make it super clear, it's not sinful to be looking after yourself, I suppose with the purpose of ultimately caring for someone else, but it's not sinful to look after yourself.
Yeah, that's very helpful. We've mentioned this, but it gets to a point when we as a church family can't necessarily care for others. And there, I guess, is this stigma about getting help. Coming from a clinical perspective, and Nath, I want you to answer this first. Sorry to put you in the spotlights there, but in terms of a clinical perspective, what's helpful? Like we know there's counselling, we know there's medication. I guess people have this idea of, shouldn't I just not have medication? Isn't that like admitting weakness? Things along those lines. What's helpful, I guess, from a clinical perspective?
Well, someone who's not clinical and completely untrained, from my experience of going to a psychologist, it was super helpful. There's so much that you can go into. There's so many different therapies. There's so many natural things that you can be doing, which just clear up the distorted thoughts that you're thinking, which I couldn't do myself. And the training that counsellors and psychologists get, it's amazing how just by asking a few questions, by sitting there with you, they know what to ask, they know what to listen out for. And it might not be an instant quick fix, but they know tactics and they know strategies of trying to help your distorted thinking. So that was so good. I think in regards to medication, that wasn't something which I needed, it wasn't something which was kind of offered or spoken about with my psychologist. I think Ivette will say a lot more on this. I think, like a physical problem, medication, like if you've got a headache, take Panadol, don't be a fool. And so if a psychologist is telling you that it might be helpful for you to consider taking medication, consider it and don't feel ashamed, don't feel like you've weak or you've given up or you've failed. By no means. It's helpful. It can be super helpful. I think, and this is just now, this is me thinking, I'm not sure what the stats are, but I would imagine that it's helpful. Medication wouldn't be a band-aid fix, as in that I think it should go hand in hand with natural therapies. I don't think a solution is that you just go on medication and that be it. I think great progress could be made if you're doing both hand in hand. But I don't know, a psychologist would know more. Ivette.
Do you want me to? Yeah. What I encourage people to do, and I think that this is a good thing to try to remember, is to try to take a holistic approach. So, because that's the way that God made us. So we've got a mind, we've got emotions, we've got a body, there's spiritual part to who we are and also our behaviour. So I think if you try to think of it that way, then what am I doing that's going to help me with my thinking? Obviously, challenging the thinking, trying to focus on the facts, the truth. In terms of physically, am I making choices in my life that are actually kind of making the mental health issues worse? So, or am I doing things, am I making healthy choices that are actually going to help me in the long run? So exercise, I know that sometimes people are sick of me talking about exercise, but exercise, honestly, it is a natural antidepressant. So if, sometimes I meet a lot of people who are really against a medication, but they need some help. So I say, okay, let's take a holistic approach and, let's try the exercise first as one of the things that you're going to do to help to balance out the chemical imbalance that's happened. And we did have a question or two about, chemical imbalance and mental health and Christianity. So maybe this will answer it. So when somebody is really struggling with a mental health issue, there is less of a particular chemical called serotonin. So the antidepressant medication or the anti-anxiety medication increases the serotonin levels so that way you can actually feel better. So there's different chemicals that are actually involved in helping you to feel good. And that's all the medication does. But like Nathan said, that's all medication does. It doesn't actually help you to make good choices or help you with your behaviour or correct your thinking. It just helps you to feel free enough in terms of how you feel to be able to do those good things. So it's important to take a holistic approach, get some exercise if you don't want to take medication. If it gets really bad, obviously your psychologist or your doctor or psychiatrist will recommend medication. Eat healthy, don't have too much caffeine if you're an anxious person because you're putting more stimulants into your body. You're already highly stimulated. It's not wise. Have a good sleep routine, very, very important, because when we have poor sleep, it can actually make our mental health struggles even worse. So, because that's just the way it is, that's the way God made it. We need to actually rest, we need to get sleep, we need to eat properly, we need to get exercise, we need to have relationships. So we need to kind of invest into each of these areas, because if you want things to get better, it's not a quick fix. It's not, I'm just going to focus on one area. You need to really look at every aspect of your life and think, okay, how can I change some of the things that I do to help me to get better and to help me to get better quickly, if possible. So a holistic approach is definitely the best, and it's obviously Christian because the Bible talks about us taking care of and honouring our bodies with the decisions that we make. So it is important to, challenge the thinking, be kind to, the way we treat our bodies, to behave in ways that will actually help us to feel better, not to feel worse. So, and obviously from a spiritual point of view, if you spend time with God and you immerse yourself in His goodness and His care and His encouragement, that obviously will help you spiritually. It will refresh your soul and, it will help you. And it may not help you straight away. I mean, I counsel Christians who are highly distressed sometimes to the point where they're despairing. And these are really, Christians who, when they experience this, they feel guilty because they think that it shouldn't be the case. And that's why it's so important to have other people there to help you through it and to say, well, this happens sometimes and let's get you through it and let's see what we can do to help you with that. So, and pray. I mean, I know that we talk about praying and sometimes people might think that that's like a quick solution, but in the Bible it says to pray, and if I was going in for an operation, I would be praying. So if I, struggling with something, like a mental health issue, pray about everything, So I think it's important to, seek help from everywhere possible, including God.
Yeah. So it's not just the one thing that we can do, but we need to take a holistic approach. And yeah, the Bible encourages that. It's not just Bible reading and prayer, which leads us to better mental health. God's given us things to use and to make the most of to help with that journey. Now that I mentioned journey, we are running out of time, so we'll have to make this one quick. But what is helpful about seeing mental health as a journey rather than A to B, I'm done with mental health? What can help us with that journey sort of attitude or mindset?
Well, I think this is something I struggled with because I thought mental illness was something that weak Christians dealt with, or people who you get over it, like you just so I think a journey, that picture of a journey, something that you're walking through, and there'll be ups and downs and different weather, and you have people walking beside you at different times, is a good picture because it's continuous. It's not like you just tick it off, like this day and this day I had this, and then tick and done. You can have significant improvement. You can grow in your coping strategies. You can deal with your anxiety and depression. But I think it's unhelpful to think that it's just, I'm done with that and it's not going to affect me again. Even, I'm sure the older we get, and even me now, like looking back at some of the thoughts I had, the kind of suicidal thoughts, it still affects me now when I reflect on it. So it's not like it's in the past, it doesn't affect me now. So I think it is helpful to see it as a progress and not as a one day kind of tick thing. Yeah.
Anything quick to add on that, Ivette? Done.
No, not really. I mean, life is a journey. So, I think that with every step that we take in life, whether it's good or bad, there is something for us to learn and to grow in. And I often talk to people about how sometimes in the toughest times, that's when you're going to grow the most. That's when you're going to get those personal stretch marks. So sometimes that's just the way it is. And we have to persevere. I mean, I'm amazed at how many times in the Bible it talks about patient endurance. So, like, endurance is not something that our society kind of promotes much. It promotes, let's fix things up really quickly, let's feel good really fast, let's be comforted all the time, like Lee mentioned on Sunday. But the reality is that the Bible talks about patient endurance. So it is a journey, and sometimes it's going to be tough. And that's why we need to support each other, and that's why we need to talk and be honest. That's why we need to pray. That's why we need to go seek help. We need to do it all because it's a journey and it's not always easy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really helpful seeing it as that journey, and the things you talked about, Nath, improving as you go along or picking up different things was really good. That is it in terms of our structured sort of stuff. We got time for a Q&A now. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can, but some of these are big questions. So I'll talk about what to do if we don't answer your question again at the end. But the first one, and I'm really looking forward to your answers on this, is the question. Is mental illness linked with Satan / the spiritual realm? Should we be praying for healing / casting out demons for people with mental illness?
Big question and a really good question. So thank you to whoever sent that through. I think it's important to think about and have a framework for. Otherwise, it's kind of this mystery and we don't really know what's going on. So I think personally, and this might be a place where we disagree, I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of traditions, church traditions, which hold different views. I suppose for me, I think it's hard to separate the two. I think it's into kind of woven the secular and the spiritual, the physical and like the spiritual realm. And so I think it's hard to be like, oh, what you've got, that's an attack from the devil, but what you've got, that's like a chemical imbalance, which is like science. Like I think it's hard to make the separation, and not to say, so I think both are at play. I think there is definitely spiritual warfare. I think there's definitely spiritual forces which will be attacking the identity of Christians and really at our core who we are. And so mental illness does that. So if I was the devil, I would be attacking the identity of Christians and challenging their beliefs about them being loved by their God and them being children of God and all those things. So if I was the devil, I would. But I think it's just too hard to make a separation. So I think it's better to play it safe and to not be going around telling people you have a demon inside of you, you have a spiritual like war going on in you. So I think it's better just to not say that stuff. Yeah.
Can I just pick up on the spiritual war thing? Because I think that's important. In our society, in our culture, I think we're in a very westernized culture. And as part of that, we forget there is a spiritual realm, and the Bible does say there's a spiritual war. Like if you look at Ephesians, it talks about the armor we need to be in that war. And so, I think that's important to remember. But also what's important is that the Bible says if you are a follower of Jesus, if you believe in him, you cannot be demon-possessed. That is not a thing. There is no verse in the Bible that says this is how you get a demon out of a Christian. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds really full-on. But if you believe in the Bible, it does talk about a spiritual war in a spiritual realm that is happening. So I think what I want to say to that, and as Nate said, it's hard to come to a definitive answer. But what I want to say to that is God's given us things to fight against what Satan is going to tempt us to do and tempt us to think. And one big part of that is the Bible, is the Word of God. It's a double-edged sword. It's a thing we can take into battle. And I think if we're not using it, if we're not spending time in it, Satan will have a few goes at you and he might be successful. So that is my sort of answer. I think it's a big question, which I don't want to delve into the little aspects of. So if you have more questions, I'm sure we're happy to. Yeah. But Ivette, you've been thrown under the bus here.
Such an interesting question, I agree. I think, honestly, if mental health was if we needed to cast out demons because mental health was always, like some demonic activity, I agree with you. The Bible does have no example of any Christian being demon-possessed, but I know that some people might disagree with that, but there is no example. But if it was true, we would be in trouble because the deliverance ministry would be massive, because I've already explained that there's about 3,000 people in Australia 3 million who experience mental health issues. So clearly, we would have a massive problem on our hands. But look, the Bible does talk about, it gives an example of someone who was demon-possessed, and obviously to the community it looked as if they were mad, but then Jesus, exorcised the demons. So, obviously we have to allow room that, yes, demon possession can be real, and, and in some societies they accept that and they see it more often. But to say that mental health issues are demon possession, we know enough from science to know that there's different brain activity. We know that medication can help. We know that exercise can help. So I think demon possession would be more the exception, not the rule, and definitely not for a Christian. And but I agree with what both of you said, which is Satan can use your vulnerabilities to try to push you down further. So if you're feeling down, he can, I believe from what the scripture says, he can also try to convince you that you're hopeless, that you're worthless. You know, he will use whatever he can to try to tempt you to think even more negative thoughts, because he wants Christians to be ineffective and he wants people to not become Christians. So that's his agenda. So, but, you know, mental health is mental health, and like I said, in some rare occasions, yes, there's demon possession, but you would probably see other signs to indicate that it's demon possession. And I have actually seen that. I used to work with homeless person services when I was in my early 20s, and there was a guy, we had a Bible study that we used to run, and there was a guy that, I don't know whether he was demon possessed, but he did scare me. And he used to come to the Bible study, and his sole purpose in attending the Bible study was to curse God, to say things against Jewish people, to say bad things about Christians. And then on one occasion, he picked up the Bible, he threw it on the floor, and he stomped on it. So, I don't know whether he was demon-possessed, but he was acting in a way that was very, scary. So, yeah, I agree with what you both said. And I think that we should pray regardless. We should pray that we think clearly. We should pray that we, can follow God better. And we should pray that people can help us. So keep praying.
Yeah. And we could keep talking about that question for a while, and that's a conversation I'm sure we should have another day. But for now, we don't have time for that. I've got 2 more questions because we are running a bit late. So good work for you guys still focusing in. It's been a long night, but hopefully a helpful one. This question is, what feelings are okay for me to express or feel when someone I love has attempted suicide? Are you meant to feel love? Are you meant to feel anger? Do you listen to what other people say? What do you do?
I think this is another really good question, and I've said that a couple of times, but I think it is. I think it shows that you're reflecting and that you really do want to know the truth and the answer. So, I think it's a great question. From my perspective, which may or not be right, but I think if you feel anger about someone in your life who is suicidal or has acted upon that, or even any sort of mental health, if you feel anger towards them, you feel anger towards them. I think it's important to name whatever you're feeling. If you're sad for that person, you're sad for that person. Even if I know this might sound weird, but if someone has committed suicide, and you might actually feel a sense of relief because you know how much that person was suffering. If that's what you feel, if you feel relief, you feel relief. So I think it's important to reflect and to name that emotion and that feeling that you're feeling. And then I suppose the next question is, what are you going to do with that feeling? Are you going to, so if it's anger, are you going to let anger stay there? Or, I don't know, it's up to you. What do you want to do with that? Do you want to, sit in that anger? I suppose as Christians, the Bible does encourage us to move from a place of anger to love. I think we support best when we love and when we are prompted by love, which can be hard and that can be a process. But I think as well, it's worth kind of framing this. And I feel like if you're angry about it, I think it shows that you love that person because you care. And so I think it's important to reflect. And if you were apathetic, if you didn't care at all, well, yeah, that's a separate issue. But if you're angry or if you're upset and frustrated and annoyed, you feel those things, I would imagine, because you love this person means something to you. So I think it's not all doom and gloom. You don't have to beat yourself up about feeling angry. You're human, that's natural. So I suppose it's just working out with yourself, what's that next step? What do you want to do with that anger?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think in terms of whether you express that, because I think part of the question was whether to express that to the person. I think you've got to remember that the person is they're not in the best frame of mind. So it is better to express it in a way that is either going to be helpful. So maybe what Nathan said, maybe instead of saying, I'm angry, say, I feel angry, but it's because I love you so much. You know, that would be maybe more helpful to think about what is underneath the anger. Is it because you care about them so much that it distresses you that they're even contemplating suicide? Because if that's the case, then I would recommend expressing that, which is how much it would hurt you and how life would be so different for you without that person. So express the love underneath the anger. And just be careful whether to express the anger or when to express the anger if you do decide to, because, like I said, that person is not in the best frame of mind. And sometimes if you say something like that, the person who is already thinking negatively might think something like, well, I can't please people, and this is just a negative way of thinking. I can't even get this right, and they might start to feel even more hopeless. So just be careful with when you express some of the things that you do and how you express it. But like Nathan said, if you feel that way, you feel that way. There's nothing, that's just the way it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would definitely explore what's underneath that, because that might be even more important than the anger, which is the love.
Yeah, both very helpful answers there. I'm going to have to call it there on the Q&A. I said we'd have time for one more, but we are running late, and I do know that people need to get good sleep, as you were saying, Ivette, for the rest of the week. So what I want to do with these questions that you guys have sent in is, if you would like them to be followed up, whether it's a ministry member, so a person of the staff team, or one of these guys, please text in a follow-up to the question which hasn't been answered, and I'll do my best to collate them and pass them to relevant people. I'm not going to promise that you're going to get an answer, but we'll do our best to answer as well as we can. And thank you so much for sending those questions in. It's helpful to talk about it, and hopefully it's been helpful for you guys. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
If you need to use the number on the screen, use the number. Like what we've talked about has been pretty full on, and if it has triggered something, there's no shame in calling that number, or messaging someone now. Call someone, talk to someone. You don't have to, be on your laptop in your room by yourself and go through this by yourself. So, I don't know. That's something. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. With that.
I mean, this has been quite a good, thing for us to talk about, but it can be, like Nathan Viv said, it's quite a heavy topic. So I think it's important to not remain, ruminating or thinking about these things too much tonight. Just give it a rest, take it easy, take care of yourself, maybe do something else that puts your mind on something that's a little bit lighter, and then tomorrow, if it's still there and you're concerned, yes, send through some more questions or contact one of us. But nighttime is often not the best time to be trying to figure things out. It's when you're tired and when you need some rest. So please just get some rest and just be mindful of that.
Yeah, very helpful advice. I've got two things to add as we wrap up. The first one is there's probably things we've said which you might not agree with, things which might have annoyed you or frustrated you, even made you angry. We understand that, and we'd, love for you to raise that with us if you have any objections. Not tonight, as Ivette is saying, but we do want to be there to help answer it. And we are starting a conversation here. The goal of this seminar hasn't been to answer every little thing and give you every bit of practical advice that we can, but please don't think we've talked about mental health up front as a seminar. That's it. We'd encourage you to speak about it. Ask your friends how they're going with mental health. Check in with people who might be struggling with mental health. And my final thing is, I think we can often jump too quickly to this, but we can often leave it out, is that if we believe in Jesus, if we are followers of Jesus, we have a resurrection hope. We know what Jesus has done. He's died and he's risen again, and he's promised a day when there won't be any more suffering, any more sadness, any more mourning, a day when the brokenness will be done with. And I want us to remember that. I don't just want us to stay down. It's okay to do that, and we've seen that with lament in Psalm 13, for example. But know that we have this resurrection hope to hold on to. I want to leave us with that. So how about I pray for us to wrap up? Let's do that. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you so much for tonight. Thank you that you've given us the time to be able to talk about such a big topic, a topic that will impact a lot of us if it hasn't already. Lord, we long for the day when you will bring it all to an end, when there won't be any sadness or suffering, but we will be how we were always meant to be. But Lord, in the meantime, as we do life together, as we wrestle with mental health, Lord, I pray that we would know ultimately that you are with us. I pray that we'd be able to hold on to that truth no matter how we feel. And I pray that we'd be able to start conversations, that we'd be able to check in on people and support one another. Lord, let's keep this conversation going. Let's be people who are a unique community, who pray for one another, who check in for one another, who are practical in caring for one another. Lord, we pray that this time that we've had now would be fruitful for that, and we pray that it'd be encouraging for those who are on a journey with mental health, and we pray that it'll be fruitful for those who are supporting those struggling with mental health. Thanks for Nath, and thanks for Ivette for their time and effort they've put into this. And Lord, I pray that we'll be able to remember helpful things from tonight and carry them into the rest of our weeks. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks so much for joining us, for taking the time out of a weeknight to sit and to listen and ask questions. It's been great to chat with these guys, and thanks for taking the time out of your weeks to do that. We'd love for you to join with us on Sunday for church as we gather and hear from God's word. But in the meantime, just remember the things that we've spoken about tonight, and remember to reach out to someone if something has been triggered tonight. But till the next time we see you, hopefully not through a screen or a camera, we'll see you then.